This is Mike Tatarsky, host of the Vietnam Weekly podcast, coming to you from Ho Chi Minh City. In the intro to last week's episode, I called out Phu Quoc as a particularly egregious example of tourism gone wrong here. The island's transformation over the last decade has been breathtaking, and I don't mean that positively. While pockets of Phu Quoc certainly remain beautiful, any hotel brochure or travel writer describing it as a, quote, untouched paradise is painfully off base. From trash-strewn beaches and unfinished concrete hotel shells to rows of empty shophouses and environmentally ruinous tourist attractions, Phu Quoc is a microcosm of everything wrong with tourism in Vietnam. If, like me, you visited the place over the years, you've no doubt been shocked by many of the changes. While I don't want to romanticize a past when Phu Quoc was economically poorer, it's hard to see the overall benefit to local residents from much of what's happening there. And you don't just have to take my word for it. Domestic visitor numbers fell precipitously during recent national holidays, in part due to high airfares, but also due to the island's reputation for poor, overpriced services. Phu Quoc has so many problems that its leader recently announced that island officials won't be allowed to travel abroad for the rest of the year, so that they can focus on fixing land management, construction, environmental, and public security problems. These topics were touched on broadly last week, while this episode is a frank discussion focused squarely on Phu Quoc. My guest today is Stuart McDonald, co-founder of Travelfish and author of the excellent Couchfish newsletter. Stuart has been traveling around and writing about Southeast Asia for about 3 decades, and is also working on his master's in responsible tourism management. He's written previously about sustainable tourism in Vietnam as well. Stuart recently visited Phu Quoc for the first time in a while, and I called him up from his home in Indonesia to get his thoughts on the place through a sustainable lens, and he has a lot of thoughts. If you're expecting a rose-tinted view of the island, this episode is not for you. We cover some positives of Phu Quoc, which there are, before getting into its severe problems, what could be done to begin addressing them, and whether or not you should visit. You may notice that we avoid naming the island's 2 biggest developers. Many of you will understand why, though you should also be able to deduce who we're referring to. As always, if you have any comments, feedback, or guest suggestions, get in touch at matatarsky@gmail.com. Now let's get to my conversation with Stuart. Stuart, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Sure. So good to see you again after seeing you in person in Ho Chi Minh City a few weeks back. So today's topic is all about Phu Quoc, basically. I mean, maybe with some broader points on Vietnam tourism. You went to Phu Quoc. I think you spent about a week there in like mid-May. You hadn't been. When was the time you were there previously?
The first time I was there was the mid-90s. I think it was 94 from memory. And I've been there a couple of times since. But it was a good 10 years, I would say, between my previous visit and this time, my most recent visit. I was there, I think it was, 8 or 9 days. Felt like 8 or 9 years, you know.
So obviously we'll get to that. So I know, I mean, of course, you pay a lot of attention to tourism regionally from your home in Indonesia, and you and I had shared some links back and forth over the past few years about what's going on in Phu Quoc. So what kind of were your expectations going in?
They were fairly low. To be honest, it wasn't actually a planned trip. I mean, I've been following the media coverage of Phu Quoc for quite some time. It's been, that there are issues there is not a new story. And there's been, for years now, progressively more concerning stories coming out of what's happening there. But what happened was earlier this year in January and February, two travel writers who are friends of mine, people whose opinions I trust and respect, they got in touch and they said, you've got to come. I mean, you've just got to come and have a look at this place. As one of them said, I can't remember exactly what they said, but essentially that they couldn't put it in words, and that it was the kind of thing you needed to see in person to understand it. And so I thought, well, why not?
And they weren't talking positively either.
No, no, is a simple answer. And I mean, they were right. I mean, nothing they could have said to me prepared me for what I encountered there. And I think it's important, though, to say at this point that it isn't all bad. I mean, the island, and this in a way is one of the most frustrating things about Phu Quoc, is that in parts of it, it still is a breathtakingly beautiful island, but other parts of it, that what has been squandered. I mean, the easiest comparison would be somewhere like Sihanoukville in Cambodia, which, to be honest, was never top of my hit list. But I mean, what it's become is, it's like Poi Phet on the beach kind of thing. And so what they were describing about Phu Quoc just made it sound like I needed to go and have a look. And so, yeah, I'm very glad I did. I met some very interesting people there and heard some interesting stories, both from people within the industry, within the tourism industry, but also talking to tourists and sort of getting their 2 cents, on what they thought.
Yeah, so we'll get to the negatives. I mean, I think they're kind of undeniable and pretty well documented at this point, even in domestic media, to a certain extent at least. But you mentioned there are some positives. You had a series of LinkedIn posts that were pretty interesting. You did note some positives. What are some of those?
Well, I mean, I'm a beach person. So, I mean, some beach areas of the island remain quite beautiful. It does have a lot of problems with resorts blocking public access to beaches. I'm not sure the exact legal situation in Vietnam with regard to public access to beaches, but I think generally that's very poor behavior. So there's some very egregious cases on Phu Quoc, but that aside, there's some nice strips of sand. In the north, there's still bits and pieces of what's ostensibly a national park, which is quite pretty. There's still terrific food. And at least for the first few nights when I was there, I was staying in a small family-run place in the northern part of the island. And I had to go through a local village to get there, or a small town, like village, whatever you want to call it. Its name escapes me just off the top of my head, but it was the real deal. It wasn't full of tourist paraphernalia and what have you. And so, at least to my taste, that sort of made it quite interesting. And then, I don't know, I would really struggle more than that. I mean, it's got great roads. I don't go to an island for its roads, but as long as you're going between two particular centers on the island, the roads are fabulous. So, I mean, the authorities may have got all sorts of the infrastructure wrong, but they nailed a lot of the roads. So credit where it's due.
We'll take that, I guess. So speaking of kind of now switching, I guess, to some of the infrastructure that's gone wrong. And I mean, I do want to kind of ground this a bit in, the studying and research you've done on kind of responsible tourism. So it's not just two white guys complaining. What are maybe the biggest, I don't know, 2 or 3 problems you saw kind of through that lens of responsible tourism?
The most visible is the trash, and it's, in a way, it's the most straightforward to address. Like, I'm coming from Bali, which has like incredible problems around waste. But what was noticeable, what was different on Phu Quoc compared to Bali, mm-hmm. is that I'm just talking about, like, not industrial waste. I mean, I have no idea whether there's piles of that there as well, but I'm just talking about throwaway garbage, plastic bags, whatever. It's everywhere. Like, I had a motorbike for the whole time I was there, just scootering around. I could pull up almost anywhere on that island. I didn't need to be on the beach. I didn't need to be near shops or whatever. I could just pull over, and within a 10-meter radius of me, there would be plastic everywhere. Not like a meter deep or anything, but it was there. And the plastic bag is like Phu Quoc's, national flower or something. And what was the contrast to Bali, where we have like tremendous waste problems on the beach, is what typically happens is the rains flush it out of the rivers, and then the currents bring it and wash it back up. Very broad strokes. I mean, there's a lot of other inputs into it, but, broad strokes. But on Phu Quoc, and I know that there are organizations that are working, doing beach cleanups. I actually tried to meet with one organization while I was there, but they were actually on holiday. That's what you get for going there at the hottest time of year. And once I started posting on LinkedIn about the state of the beaches, a number of hoteliers got in touch to say, well, we actually clean up in front of our beach and whatever. But the difference compared to Bali is that a lot of the rubbish is actually above the high tide mark. So it's not stuff, you do have like nappies and things being washed in by the waves, but as soon as you go back into the grassland behind, there's plastic everywhere. And so that isn't so much the currents bringing it in, that's people dumping it. And towards the end of my trip, I went down to Long Beach and I took the old beach road. So not the new highway that goes down to the south, but there's a narrow road that runs all the way along the beach. And to their credit, all but one of the hotels let me ride straight through their front bit. It was only the Regent that made me go round in a circle. But all along that ride, particularly, like I mentioned the Regent, but immediately to the south of it, right by the dune, was a massive fire pit for burning rubbish. And that's like right beside the hotel. I know, okay, it's not their land, or I assume it's not their land, but still, if somebody else is burning rubbish right beside where your guests are, that's a problem. And then like obviously on areas of Long Beach that have been abandoned or they're yet to be built into whatever, there is plenty of evidence of burning rubbish. Not a lot, but some of the properties I visited, particularly the smaller guest house style places, I guess you'd describe them, they were burning their rubbish. The one place I talked to where I asked the owner about separating, is there a program for separating out your waste into organics and recyclables and whatever? And they said, no, they don't do that. It all just goes onto the same truck, it goes into the same pile. So what's the point? So that kind of thing is a problem. The overall waste processing on Phu Quoc has been a long-running debacle. But what I sort of took away from that is it's really a case of broken priorities. It's not like there's not the money. They've had the money to put in an extensive and good quality road network, but there's no waste processing. You can't have these gigantic hotels. Like some of those hotels are gargantuan and have nowhere to put the rubbish. Letting properties externalize those kind of problems or issues, whatever you want to call it, is like the epitome of unsustainable tourism development. So like that's in a nutshell the rubbish kind of issue. Some resorts that I spoke to, again, these are small little places, which is, who I'm kind of interested in talking to. Again, from a sustainable tourism point of view, these small businesses are the ones that we should be supporting, So like even things like getting potable water, not having to rely on putting down a well, that kind of thing. That's a real problem. It's a real challenge. I talked to one hotel owner who lost almost their entire beach when the sand miners came in. And they said the boats would sit offshore every evening, sucking up the sand. Now, they told me where they thought the sand went. When that mining was going on, it coincided with some construction projects and stuff like that. I wouldn't name where it was going. Even looking further afield to like Singapore, it has been a huge buyer of lifted sand from the region, from Cambodia, from Vietnam, from the Mekong Delta. And, Singapore's now extending itself and calling it itself a sustainable tourism, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, that was another problem. Nearly all of the employees I spoke to were either returning Vietnamese who have left the country earlier and have come back, or were from elsewhere in Vietnam. I'm talking about hotel, restaurant staff, sort of people. I can't think of. Oh no, actually, I'm wrong. Again, at the very end of my stay, it was actually one of the most enjoyable afternoons I had on the island. Was in a small place that was run by a guy who said he was from Phu Quoc. His English was limited, and my Vietnamese is not great, but that seemed to be what was the situation. So again, I mean, tourism to Phu Quoc is not a new thing. I mean, even when I went there in the 90s, there were hotels there. So what's that? That's 30 years. There's been the opportunity to start training schemes, to improve education, to be feeding staff into the hotel industry, for example. Yet most of the people I spoke to were from Đà Lạt, Nha Trang, Hue, even Hanoi, obviously a lot from Ho Chi Minh City. And I get that, like some of the investing money is coming from elsewhere and what have you. But if it's not providing local jobs, I mean, what's it doing there? I mean, aside from the general environmental degradation, I mean, I went diving there, the state of the reefs was not good. Yeah, I mean, that's it sort of in a nutshell for the things that I have an interest in and that I was looking at. I didn't go. I know that there's a big development in National Park. I didn't go to that. I don't need to see that to have an opinion on whether that should be there or not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the waste thing is, obviously Vietnam's not alone in struggling to confront waste issues, but it has, I think I've been to Phu Quoc half a dozen times over the last 10, 12 years, and I could look it up. I don't know if they've opened any new waste treatment facilities in that time. There's talk about it, but it seems like everything is delayed. And I did stumble upon the just open air landfill at some point. And, it's true the higher end places do clean their beaches. So the beaches are nice, but all that trash is just going to, a landfill that's not being treated. So that's not really solving the problem, although other than it not being on the beach.
Sorry, I mean, this is the whole thing. There's no point if you're just picking up the stuff off the beach and it's going in a hole in the middle of the island. You're not really getting very far. Almost every hotel that I stayed in is still using plastic bottles. You go and get a coffee on the side of the street, and it comes in a plastic cup with a plastic lid and a plastic straw in a plastic bag. I'm having it here. It's not even a takeaway coffee. I don't want to keep comparing it to Bali because I think they are quite different situations. But on plastic, at least here in the heavily touristed destinations, there is ostensibly a plastic bag ban. Now, how well that has been followed is up for debate, but it's a start. And they should just not be having plastic disposable bottles in hotels, period. And so it was really sort of difficult to understand where another thing, sorry, just talking about things that were sort of bothering me, is something else there, particularly north of the airport on Long Beach, which is quite heavily developed. There's still some abandoned hotels, and I was amazed the wreckage at the Thousand Stars was still there. That was there the very first time I went there. It was famous for its tragic sculpture garden, which is still there in pieces. But a number of properties are piping in the least stormwater, drain water straight out onto the beach. And I just find that I was incredulous. There was one strip, I won't name the hotel, but they had their deck chairs lined up out front, and then right beside the deck chairs were three pretty gross looking pipes with water falling out onto the sand. I mean, where is your pride in what you're doing? I mean, I doubt that, it's not black water. I assume it's stormwater or from the gardens or who knows. But you shouldn't have to sit there and wonder about it. If a hotel is expecting you to sit on the beach and they're piping water that they don't want to have on their property anymore, they're piping it into the sand right beside you, and it's going into the ocean where you're expected to swim, that's a big ask. I mean, another rider who was there before me, who is much more hooked in with a more luxurious end of the stick, the tourism stick, they told me, so this is like secondhand hearsay, whatever, that they were told just not to swim in the water there at Long Beach. So that's not great. And I mean, to one point, the hotels, they have their swimming pools, so, you don't have to get in the water. But that shouldn't be what is happening.
No, I mean, it's an island after all.
Yeah, well.
Okay, so, I mean, I mentioned at the start that there is occasional kind of acknowledgement, I guess among officialdom, that there are problems on Phu Quoc. I showed you this link recently that I found amusing, that the island government, banned, or not banned, asked their officials to not go abroad for the rest of the year so they can, stay there and take care of the many important tasks they have to take care of. I guess that's good, but the article also kind of talked more about illegal land use, and there have been issues with that, with illegal villas being built. Several officials have been arrested over the last year, and granted that I don't want to dismiss that as a problem, but on kind of an island-wide scale, I think 10 illegally built houses is not the biggest problem. But if we want to try to talk about solutions or policies, if you had a magic wand, what would a couple maybe policies be that could kind of have an immediate impact?
Well, I mean, obviously a building ban. There shouldn't be another tourism-related business built on that island. Absolutely not. Anything that is abandoned should be leveled immediately. And the thing is that, and I was sorry, just coming back to a building ban, until that they can process the waste that is on the island, until there is adequate potable water for everybody on that island, they should not build another tourism-related business. I'm absolutely unequivocal on that. And the thing is that, riding around it, it's actually a big island. There's a lot of space, and there's a lot of real estate, particularly Long Beach, that has been earmarked for Christ knows what. You look at the billboards, and it's, the stuff of fever dreams. But a lot of that land hasn't been built on. And it's a real opportunity, it would involve some serious ball breaking, but I mean, to just take that land back and say, right, this isn't going to be a tourism, we're not going to have resorts and crap along here. I mean, here there's ostensibly a 100-meter build back law. So you're not allowed to build within 100 meters of the high tide mark. Of course, everybody does, but then legally they're not supposed to. So can you imagine, Phu Quoc Beach, where the first 100 meters back from the beach for that entire length had nothing on it. It was all public space, gardens, parks, walkways, things like that. That would be, for Southeast Asia, that would be a first. I can't think of anywhere else like that. And Phu Quoc, actually, it would be possible. I mean, they'd have to level the region, I guess, but no great lot. But I mean, for the rest of it, I mean, there is an awful lot of real estate there that is either nothing has happened, clearly nothing is going to be happening for a while. So, I mean, there's an opportunity there. And they are doing some, there's the electric buses. They need a plastic bag ban. Hotels should be stopped from using single-use plastic bottles. What else? I don't know. I would start with that. I mean, you start with beaches and you work backwards. Phu Quoc is not what's it known for? It's coconuts, it's pepper, it's fish sauce, and it's beaches. I mean, there was a ridiculous story. I think you sent it to me. You or James, I can't remember, somebody who sends me stories that annoy me, but was talking about the cultural attractions of nightlife entertainment. And it's okay, yeah, you've got a beach bar or whatever, but it's just, it doesn't strike me as a fit. It's not so far gone that is the only route. And like in tourism, you have this, they call it the tourism, and this is like academia, but it actually mimics real life for once. It's like the tourism life cycle. So like it's like a hump on a camel's back. So it starts off low and it's just the backpackers and very low key thatch huts and what have you. Then starts to develop and you get the hotels coming in, and then either it gets overdeveloped and goes down the tube, and so you go down the back of the camel, or the destination reinvigorates itself in some way or whatever, and so it goes through another cycle of going up. I mean, the backpackers never come back, but, it's sort of that kind of theory. So Phu Quoc is definitely a long way down the camel's back. Like, it's had its peak. Some of the development there is very ill-considered. And also, like, when you think about it from a sustainability point of view and what's happening in Vietnam with the domestic airline situation, because of the problem with the engines and what have you, it became suddenly very expensive to fly to the island. Like, I went there back and forth by bus and boat, but that's just because I'm a stubborn git that refuses to fly domestic. Every foreign tourist I talked to flew there. So when you're talking about tourism being sustainable and the destinations want to try and push themselves on this kind of ground, if the only way to get to the island is to fly, then the destination has to work even harder to make sure that what's happening once you get there is as sustainable as possible. And so that means, like with sustainability, it's environment, economic, and social. So you look at the environment in Phu Quoc, it's a mess. You look at the economy, what's happening there, it's a mess. You look at the social side of things there, how much of the money are local people getting, it's a mess. So on all three of those pillars, Phu Quoc has major issues, and the only way to get there, the only way most people will get there, is to fly. So for the inbound operators, as more and more pressure goes onto those operators to say you need to be more sustainable, they're going to at some stage say, well, are we going to go to Phu Quoc, or is it just such a mess that we're better off to go to somewhere that's marginally better run? I don't know, Samui or something like that. I'm not saying Samui is like a bright shining light, but I mean, this is a big sort of risk factor, not just for Phu Quoc, but for lots of islands. And one of the sort of counterpoints that when I was in Vietnam last year, I was working on a series of stories about sustainable tourism there. It was supposed to be a 3-part series, and I got so depressed after 2 bits at the third one. But one of the things that we were, even then, so it was about 18 months ago, even then, people who I talked to, Phu Quoc just kept coming up over and over and over again. It was the triad of Phu Quoc, Hoi An, and Ha Long Bay were like the three, and Sapa as well. But it was like in all 3 cases, the conversation was 10, 15 years ago, these were world-class destinations. Now, all that we read about them is that they're a disaster area. How do we fix it? But one part of the counterpoint with particularly regarding Phu Quoc was that most of the business is domestic, and that the development, that some of the development that is happening on the island is particularly catering to the domestic market. Now, I was only there for a fairly short period of time, but I was there for a holiday weekend, and the ferries going over were jammed. When I went to those 2 very large projects, the one in the north and the one in the south, business was pretty slow. I mean, that's just, obviously I wasn't going around door knocking at the southern project. I'd have to knock on like 10,000 freaking doors. But I mean, the scale of those 2 developments is just mind-boggling. And there's nobody or very few people there. And the thing is that the argument of saying, well, we need to have Venice in Phu Quoc, or we need to have the Amalfi Coast in Phu Quoc, because domestic travelers can't afford to go to Europe, right? Now, pass the bong, but even that aside, I mean, the primary, if you're Vietnamese and you can afford to go to Phu Quoc, you can afford to go to Europe, but it's much more difficult to get a visa to go to Europe. This isn't a cost thing. This is a visa challenge. So it's sort of like a bit of a red herring, that argument. And like I rode around both of those projects extensively until the security would like chase me away. And they were empty. I mean, it was just street after street after street of empty buildings. And the one on the north where they have those glass, the shop fronts all have the glass at the front, and they've put pictures in each of them. So it looks like, if you're going past in the car at speed, it looks like it's actually a bookshop or whatever, but it's not. It's just a concrete husk in a Harry Potter style. I have no understanding of the economics behind that, but I know that particularly that northern project, how much native forest was logged to put that thing in. How can you support that and talk about how can you want to encourage that sort of business and talk about sustainable tourism in the same breath?
Yeah, I mean, if you understand Vietnam very much, you'll understand why we're leaving these two places unnamed. Although most of you should be able to figure out what they are. But yeah, they are. I mean, I haven't really been to the northern one. I've driven past it, but I've been in the southern one, and it's jaw dropping. I mean, you're not exaggerating. There's hundreds of empty buildings. I mean, you mentioned the nighttime economy thing, which every province here is kind of obsessed with right now. I was at a wedding in Phu Quoc late last year, and we went to a bar in this development. Had a lot of fun. Had the place totally to ourselves, and everyone left not terribly late. And I think it took people like 30 minutes to get a taxi. Like the hotel we were staying at ended up sending a golf cart to pick some people up, and so it's just like, should people do anything at night or not? It's really just astonishing. And you preempted my question about like, because there are people who say like, oh, you're just foreigners, who cares, it's not for you anyway. But as you say, it's not like they're buzzing with activity.
No, I mean, in the northern one, I wasn't able, they turned me away, like I couldn't get into the beach area. But in the south, you get like pretty free reign. And like I went down to see that kissing bridge thing. It was one of the most absurd things I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen some pretty absurd stuff. I mean, I've been to Vegas, but I mean, as you walked into it, like I was there for sunset, so that's like the special time to go. And they had they were Russian or Ukrainian, this jet boat display thing of people buzzing around. There was a couple there who were getting married, so they were the two people were on each side of the kissing bridge and what have you. And it was so spectacularly absurd that I couldn't not enjoy it. Like it was very difficult to, like, it was the sublime and the absurd, but still it was like, what is it doing here? I'm on Phu Quoc. I'm not on the Amalfi Coast. Yeah, I was just baffled by it. And when I was upstaying on Long Beach, I'm not much of a fan for tourist food and that kind of thing. And so I would go into the main little town at the fishing village kind of thing there, a little bit to the north of Long Beach. And the local food is excellent, right? And they have this contrived, super crappy tourist market thing, but you didn't need that. And Vietnam, over and over and over again, I see this across the country, that they seem to feel that, or that I'm using the wrong word, I shouldn't be saying they, but the tourism authority, the thinking heads behind tourism, whoever they are, they seem to feel that they need to construct these markets for tourists, and it's a crap experience, and there was really nothing good about it. But you go around the corner, there's a extremely good local restaurant that specializes in a dish which Phu Quoc is known for. In the other direction, there's another place that is absolutely famous for its specialty dish. Now, the only reason I knew about either of those is because I know Vietnamese food writers, and they said, this is what you need to go and do. You need to go and eat here and eat here and eat here, like that kind of thing. There's nothing from the tourism board. They could mark in Dong Dong like a little tourist walking trail. Do it yourself. This kind of stuff, it's like in Hue. It has the best food in the country. And yet the tourism people there are just obsessed with doing things that they're like, we want to do anything that doesn't involve the food here. When the real attraction is the food, is the old city. And all you need to do is give punters a helping hand. They don't need this Disneyland night market or beer street like Bouvian or whatever, It's just give me the real deal, but tell me where it is, So, I mean, Phu Quoc was like a good example for that kind of thing of just the development where it's like, yeah, okay, is this just money laundering, or is there actually a plan, right? Maybe there is some plan that I'm not aware of is somehow going to start raining gold bars, but I don't see it. And if you look there's southeast coast down the bottom, there's a fancy hotel that it had, when it launched, they pretended they used to be a French university.
Oh, the JW.
The JW, thank you. That is the quintessential case of what the fuck is this? Why is this here? It's not okay, if there was actually once a university there, okay, great idea, but there wasn't. So I went to that beach, and it's a very nice beach, and unusually it's quite easy to get public access to it. And then afterwards, right up at the northern tip of it, there's a seafood shack place. They're probably squatters. And so I went and had a super simple seafood lunch up there. And then talking to the guy in the shack, I'm like, I'm looking for something interesting to do. And he said, oh, you should go to the jail. And I'm like, what were you talking about? And it turns out that I don't know, it's 500 meters up the road. There's a old, it's called the Jail Museum. And it's super interesting. And it was just interesting that you had that, which was actually a real live historical important site if you want an understanding of Vietnam. And I certainly never knew about it until I went to it, where meanwhile down the beach, not even a kilometer away, there's something with a completely fabricated history that is all over the internet, when I went diving, two of the people who I went diving with were staying there, and they're talking about the place. I'm like, that's all bullshit, right? And they're like, what do you mean? And they explained it. They're like, oh, no, I didn't know that.
I would say that video, yeah, which I don't think they're actually promoting it anymore, but remains one of the strangest things I've seen. And I, like you, I've seen some strange stuff over the years, but absolutely baffling. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these issues, it's kind of all concentrated in Phu Quoc, but the kind of the issues with top down, this nighttime economy focus. And yeah, we see a lot of it here in Ho Chi Minh City. In my neighborhood a few months ago, they opened a night walking street, which I'm all for, pedestrianizing places even for, a few hours at night, but there's nothing on it. There's some restaurants that are open, obviously, but there's no additional amusement. So you walk down it once and you're like, well, I've been to the night street. Cool. And again, maybe I hope they keep giving it a shot. Maybe in the future it can improve, but you see a lot of this in Phu Quoc where it's just and some of that stuff has been there for a while now, and it's still not clear what what the intention is,
what the purpose is, And I think it's important to sort of mention that I'm pretty critical, I guess you would say, and some of the foreign Western tourists that I spoke to, it was interesting hearing their view on the island, because for starters, they're not as well traveled in the region as me, so they didn't really have as much to compare it to. So one couple, like, to be fair, they were on their honeymoon. So, they never left the resort, and I understand that. And they loved it. But what they loved about it, what they spoke about it more than anything else, was the buffet breakfast.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's great. I'm glad you're having a nice late breakfast and everything. You can have that anywhere in the world. There is nothing Phu Quocian about a buffet breakfast. So they were staying in a beautiful hotel. It's very expensive. It's got lovely grounds and whatever. But they never left the grounds except when they went diving. So what my takeaway from that was that, okay, well, the hotel's doing a good, like, these people were not at all sustainably minded, right? Just to be clear. But the hotel delivered what they wanted. But that hotel could just as easily be in Bali or Barbados or Beirut. It doesn't matter. The actual location where the hotel is was irrelevant to this couple's experience. And that kind of interchangeability of destinations is a real problem. So, and then the others were more mixed. They were staying in more mixed levels of accommodation, lots of complaints about the rubbish, lots of complaints about hassle from touts, which Vietnam always gets, and I do not understand. I mean, I've traveled extensively there, and for the region, I really do not think that Vietnam has a tout problem whatsoever. There's always going to be the odd one, but it's hardly playing proportions. I find the Vietnamese generally exceptionally hospitable people and fun to be around, and they don't give a shit that I can't speak Vietnamese, and they can't speak English, but they're still happy to chat away to me anyway. How many conversations you've had in a coffee shop with some old dude, and you're sitting there nodding and saying yes and no and understanding what each other's saying.
Yeah, I agree with you on the tout thing, and this is where I'll defend Vietnam for a minute. And I go on the Vietnam subreddit a few times a week, and I swear 75% of the posts are people like accusing somebody some Vietnamese person of scamming them or ripping them off, and I'm like, am I living in another world? Because this doesn't happen.
I'm not saying it never happens.
Of course, yeah.
But I think by and large, if within Southeast Asia, the Vietnamese are some of the most hospitable people in the region. Yeah. And I spoke to, and this is an important point, I spoke to a lot of people while I was on Phu Quoc. Only 2 would let me record.
Sure.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. They know, the people I was talking to, they know what my view is. I'm not going in like pretending I'm gonna write some great story saying what a great place it is. They know that I think that there's problems there, and they were happy to sit there and tell me what their thoughts were off the record, but there's no way on earth they were gonna put their name to what they were saying until, and this isn't a issue restricted to Phu Quoc, but until the situation changes, if you can't even have an honest dialogue, how can you possibly expect anything to change? When you're talking to a hotelier who has had to drop their rates by more than 50% because somebody stole their beach, and the local authorities would do nothing about it, how do you expect things to improve?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing I think, kind of hinting at earlier when I mentioned, there is some acknowledgement locally or in domestic media that there's a problem, but never discussed as a problem are, for example, these 2 huge developments we've been skirting around. Instead, they get their latest fanciful development, plastered all over PR articles and all that stuff. So that's, concerning.
I was just going to say, like, when you were asking earlier about, like, what would I change and that kind of thing. And I mean, it's not my island. It's not my country. Like, I'm not trying to tell people how to suck eggs. But I can tell you what is missing. And what is missing, at least from the people who have the control, is a vision. Is to say, okay, we're not going to talk about what we're going to have next week. We're going to talk about what we're going to have in 20 years' time. And that's the only sort of time span that you need to talk in if you're serious about sustainability. If you're serious about having a destination that people are still, that my children will want to go to, that the hoteliers, the local family who have a homestay there, that their children will still want to run rather than go to Saigon to get some, job in the cardboard box factory. I mean, you need a long-term vision. And I mean, this is hardly a problem that is restricted to Phu Quoc, but the lack of vision is like pretty galling. Like you sort of see, you just ride down that highway and look at what is on the billboards of what is to come. Towards the southern end, there is this, I forget the name of it now, but there is a multi-tower complex that wouldn't be out of street in Singapore, And it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. That's good to kind of, as we come to a close here, kind of frame it that way as like, this is not, because I also try to avoid I'm kind of not old enough for most places, but I do see people, foreigners, let's say, who will talk about Phu Quoc or take your pick of a tropical island and be like, 30 years ago, this was untouched paradise. And maybe it's a visitor, but they were also probably like dirt poor for the residents. So I don't want to quite have that like backwards looking perspective. But yeah, I mean, like, what is the future for the people of Phu Quoc?
Sure. I know we're sort of running short of time, but something else that I do want to mention is that some of the people that I spoke to there, it's not like people don't care, A lot of people I spoke to cared a lot about what was happening. And, like in their own ways, they're trying to do bits and pieces, like whether it's cleaning the beach in front of their place or doing something for, like one person I spoke to was doing some outreach with kids from a local school to give them a little bit more exposure into tourism's, donating money, supporting people in need. And I mean, that is all great. It isn't like this wasteland. It's just the balance is out. And I'm not sort of saying they should go back to 1993 when everyone was living in a shack and eating coconuts. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am saying is that you can't think about where we are now without thinking about where we're going to be in 20 years. And what has been made on Phu Quoc in the last 30 years has become entirely tourism reliant. So that makes it all the more critical that the next 20 years is going to retain it as a destination where people want to go. They only need to look across the water to Sunakville to see where folly can take you. It's a cautionary tale.
Sure. And I mean, much of it has happened, honestly, in the last 10 years or even less, which it's kind of astonishing how fast this has all gone. Okay, so last question. I mean, for the 10 people who are still listening this far in, if any of them are still like, hey, should I go to Phu Quoc? If somebody asks you that, I know sometimes you do travel advice for people. What would you say?
Would I go? Personally, I wouldn't race back. I think if you're in Vietnam for the first time and you're not going anywhere else in Southeast Asia and you want to have some beach time, as long as you pick judiciously, I would definitely recommend avoiding any kind of large resort. I would aim for a small family-run business. The northern parts of the island have some of the better-run businesses, and I would give it a bit of time. It's like anywhere. The longer you spend there, the more people you will meet, and every day you have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the place and why it is how it is and what's going on and where it could be going. So, yeah, I wouldn't say, no, don't go. but I'd say research carefully, stay in a small family-run operation, and manage your expectations, and don't bother diving.
Yeah, I think that's all good advice. I mean, I tell people as well, you can still have a very nice trip there. I mean, I've been a couple times in recent years and enjoyed it, but there are aspects of it, as we've discussed, that are quite shocking. Well, Stuart, anyway, yeah, I do. I enjoy these types of conversations, even if it can be a bit painful, but I think it's important for people to talk about. And again, Phu Quoc has been getting a lot of attention, so we're not just like pulling this from thin air as well. So hopefully something more sustainable can happen there in the future. But yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I think it's the more people talk about this kind of stuff, the better. The only potential of this kind of talk is to bring about positive change. And there's plenty of scope for positive change on Phu Quoc.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for having me, and I'll catch up with you next time.
That's it for this week's episode of the Vietnam Weekly podcast. Connect with the Vietnam Weekly on Threads, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Thank you so much for listening, and please rate or review the show on your preferred podcast platform. See you next week.